Hi, I'm Ryan Pesch, and today we're going to talk about growing tomatoes like a pro. I'm a person with a couple of lives. In my day job, I'm an extension educator that works in community economic development. But by night, I am a certified organic vegetable operator, and I think it's primarily with that hat that I talk about growing tomatoes. So um, I'm wearing my Lida Farm hat here today talking about this. So I thought for this presentation, I'd just talk a little bit about such things as tomato varieties, some disease issues, generally just how we grow tomatoes and our process and our timeline for growing tomatoes here in Otter Tail County. So this is a view outside my kitchen window. We are in Otter Tail County. We're the land of lakes and trees and dairy farms and this kind of thing. And this is our back field from a few years ago. A little pond in the background, but it's fairly slopey ground. And we operate on a 20-acre farm, of which we grow on about around 4 acres each year. We are located east of Pelican Rapids. If you can place Pelican Rapids off Highway 59, we are 8 miles to the east. Some people might know Maplewood State Park. We are just immediately straight north of there, a couple miles. We're a family operated operation. This is the whole family and workforce, including the dog. I suppose he's part of the workforce simply because he also keeps the deer out of the garden and the like, and general kind of farm protector. But on the left, you see my wife, our oldest daughter, Sylvia, who's 15. The tall guy in the back is Willem, who's 13, and then our son, Graham, who's 10. And this is the backside of our self-serve farm stand at our operation. We are certified organic. We've been certified for the last six years, maybe 6 seasons, 6 or 7 seasons. And I always like to just kind of explain some of the details around certified organic. I think the term organic gets thrown around a fair amount, but to be certified is certainly a process for operators like myself. And there are set standards for certified organic production, both vegetable production and other forms of production. So the same set national standards. You can't use this USDA organic label unless you are actually certified. There is an exception for extremely small farm operations, but they still need to follow those standards. So I always like to emphasize that certified organic is always GMO free. You can't use GMO seeds or grow GMO crops in an organic system. It seems like some people are always a little unclear about that. We do need to use organic seed when available, and we certainly do. This past year, we raised about 189 different seed varieties, or different crops, if you want to think of them that way. And about, I don't know, maybe 70% of those were with certified organic seed. There's certainly some crop varieties that we aren't able to access as organic seed. Doesn't allow for any synthetic pesticides, whether those are fungicides, insecticides, or like, and certainly, I think one thing to emphasize in certified organic, when you're certified organic, there are questions and expectation that you employ conservation practices. So, in terms of how we market our produce, so again, we're growing basically 4 acres of produce. I know that's a drop in the bucket in the world of soybeans or something like that, but in the world of produce, it adds up. To give you a sense of scale, this past year we raised about 2,000 tomato plants, 2,000 pepper plants. And so that gets to be a fair amount of material, if you will, that we sell directly to consumers. For 14 years, we sold at a farmer's market. I've since stepped away from that. We operate 3 farm stands, one that I do in person, one that I do in conjunction with a bakery in Fergus Falls, and that's on consignment. And so that I just deliver to once a week. And then most importantly is our roadside stand at the end of our driveway. And that's a self-serve stand, and we've been operating it now for about 10 years. So besides that, we also do CSA, and this is about 60% of our sales. So, and I would say, like, in terms of growing for a CSA, we're growing a very wide amount of varieties, a wide amount of crops, because we just need the variety on a weekly basis. And so that we're able to supply the staples in good quantities and also sprinkle in some things that people wouldn't typically buy, maybe, or just to give them a little sampling of things to try. A lot of people aren't buying fresh fennel, but we'll have fresh fennel in the box maybe once or twice in a year. We're not trying to overload people with strange or unusual things. I think that's kind of an issue with CSAs, where people think they get nothing but crazy stuff. Instead, we really try to go long on the staples and sprinkle in some things that they might find a little interesting that they wouldn't have bought if you're just perusing the grocery store. So the main idea behind this presentation is to talk about tomatoes, right? So you have a little context about our operation, who we are, and the like. But ever since we've been operating here since 2004, and certainly before that, when I was an apprentice, and we sold and grew for a market in Minneapolis when we initially started out, we've always grown tomatoes, right? It's a mainstay. And I think there's a lot of good reasons to raise tomatoes. And I think we could tick those off pretty easily. One, they taste great. You know what I'm saying? I think it's it's a very versatile food, right? We can use it in the sauce. We can eat it fresh. But I think the thing, I really am a tomato person. We grow about, over 20 some varieties of tomatoes each year. And I really take a lot of pride in tomatoes. As a grower, as a commercial operator, I love tomatoes, because there's a lot of variety. I mean, just take a look at this table. Besides the variety, they're just beautiful, right? I mean, there's a lot to be said about a tomato. A nice tomato display really stands out. And in terms of variety, we're talking about, a whole wild mix of cherry tomatoes. We talk about heirlooms. We have, standard slicing types. We have Romas. There's a lot going on, and it's a beautiful crop. It's also a main crop for a lot of commercial operators because people really seek out fresh grown tomatoes in a way that they don't other crops. So, if you have a tomato in the winter from a supermarket, it's kind of a tasteless thing, but a fresh grown tomato grown locally from a producer is really great. And so that's a real standout. Here are the varieties that we grow. We grow a lot of cherry tomatoes in high tunnels, in large part because they don't split and we can control their water and get them to be really sweet, right? So once we get fruit on a vine, we really cut back on how much moisture we give them, kind of starve off the plant a little bit so that we have really sweet fruit. And so we're known for cherry tomatoes. We will often do these mixed cherry tomatoes that really kind of stand out in the market and give us a good name. In terms of the varieties, I want to say this past year we did 7 different varieties. We always grow black and white cherry, our open pollinated heirloom varieties. We have grown, and we didn't grow this past year, Isis, which is from Seed Savers. It's a really neat cherry tomato because it has a lot of variety in terms of color and shape and size. It's really kind of a neat tomato. We grow the real standards, Sun Gold and Sweet 100, which are kind of real standards in the way of cherry tomatoes. And that's sort of a mainstay. We grow artisans, which is a Johnny's collection, if you will. They're these stripy ones, like a Lucky Tiger is one variety, and striped bumblebee is another one. I really like Nova, which is an orange grape tomato. Performs very well, has great flavor, as well as 5 Star is the grape tomato that we grow. So yeah, it's a pretty good mix. In terms of standards, our mainstay tomato is Defiant that we buy. It's a certified organic seed that we buy from Johnny's. It has a lot of, what do you say? It's a lot of good disease resistance built into it. So that's our main reason that we grow it. It also produces a very large fruit and a very consistent fruit. So we really like Defiant. It is a celebrity type. We still do raise standard celebrity. Oregon Spring, in part because it's an early slicing tomato, and also the standard Mountain Fresh Plus, which always seems to perform pretty well. Besides, in terms of other varieties, for an early variety, I do like Muskvich, which is an heirloom variety, open pollinated variety that seems to perform very well, and it's always the earliest tomato that we grow. In terms of heirlooms, I like Jean Flamme, which is these small kind of cocktail sized tomatoes. This year we also grew a Valencia, and I think it has a little more disease resistance than the Jean Flamme and holds a little better in the field, so I might stick with that. We also will consistently grow Cherokee purples and the green ones. I forget it now. Anyways, too many varieties apparently. There's aromas. For a long time I grew this variety called Golden Rave, which is, I can't find the seed anymore, which was a golden Roma variety, which is great for fresh eating. Just really loved it. Grandorero, Viva Italia. We also grow San Marzanos typically, because a lot of people really appreciate them. I like a good San Marzano, but they always get a lot of yellow shoulder issues, and it's kind of inconsistent. People really do, in terms of buying Romas, often prefer these kind of smoother, more consistent varieties like a Grandorero or a Viva Italia. So that's what we really concentrate on. Oh, Green Zebra, that's it. I don't know why I forgot that, but Green Zebra, we also really enjoy. We've also dealt with, in terms of heirlooms, Nebraska Wedding, German Pinks. We'll throw some different heirlooms in, although heirlooms really get a lot of disease issue. And say this summer, when we had a lot of rain, there's a lot of disease issues in the heirlooms. They just really didn't perform well at all. In a drier season, they do a lot better. So this is probably old hat for for those of you that are on this call that are organic growers and you do use the organic method. But I always like just to emphasize this, and I put this on this handout as well, that I try to just boil down what the organic method is all about. At least in my mind. These are like Ryan's rules for growing organically, whether we're growing tomatoes or peppers or whatever. But number one, the main idea is if we have good soil and strong plants, that covers 80% of our issues. So before we start thinking about, what are all the inputs we can employ, let's just raise a solid transplant or a healthy transplant and then plant it in good soil. Part of growing strong plants is also choosing seeds that have good disease resistance. Like I was saying with Defiant, that's the main reason that we're growing it, has good disease resistance, and performs really well even if we have disease issues. Number two, let's do cultural practices first. And this is sort of like what we can do in managing the operation. And it's kind of like the good hygiene of growing, if you will. And so certainly in the world of tomatoes, rotation is absolutely huge. The thing that plagues tomatoes the most are these fungal issues. And these fungal issues oftentimes are related to the material from the year before and stems and leaves from the year before that have the fungal spores in them, and it's easily spread the next year. So no way do we want to have the same family 2 years in a row. And so ideally we get 3 years between when we plant them and when we plant them again in the same spot. Sometimes it gets to be a bit of a problem if you have limited space. You can only rotate so much. I understand that, especially if you have some families that are really big, like cucurbits and solanaceae. It's hard not to have them overlap sometimes. I get that, but ideally we have a good rotation at play. Second, when it comes to another cultural practice, when it comes to tomatoes, that's important, is trellis. If we can get the plants off the ground, there's more airflow. If there's more airflow, the plants dry out well, and the tomatoes dry out well, the fruit dries out, and we have less rotting, less disease, and the like. Certainly a mulch. A number of years we have used mulch. We haven't this past year, just in terms of time, but the more we can kind of keep the splash, rain splashing up onto, and soil splashing up onto the plants and on the fruit, we have less issues. And in terms of irrigation, we never use overhead irrigation on tomatoes. We will use it on some greens and where we need to germinate some seeds in places like carrots and the like. But for the most part, for a lot of crops, we just use drip irrigation that keeps the moisture at the root level and no splash on the plants. Number three, in terms of the organic method, if there is a disease issue, because I always get this question, like, hey, my tomato plants, they look bad. What can I spray on these things so they stay green and look healthy all year long? And, my question to people was always like, well, are you getting fruit or not? And because we are raising the tomato for the fruit, we don't really care about the plant. And they'll be like, oh yeah, of course, we're getting fruit, it's fine, but then we have, the foliage is gone, so we should do something. No, you shouldn't do something. Part of the organic method is to really say, it's kind of like raising lambs. Do you really need to jump in to help the lambing process, yes or no? Oftentimes you don't. If you just give things some time, let nature do its thing. Same thing here. Is there really an issue we need to jump in on? Is it really this big of an issue as you think it is? Probably not. So I always err on the side of not intervening unless I really need to. And so in terms of disease, this is what I'm doing. If we're early in the season and a plant's obviously diseased, I just pull the plant. And if I'm raising 2,000 plants, I might pull 12, 20 some plants that are obviously diseased, looking bad, and just cull them and get them out of the way. That's often how we just deal with a very clear disease issue, nip it in the bud early. But that's really the other things that I think of as your organic method. So in terms of our calendar and how we're raising tomatoes, early April is when we're planting seeds. Really, we want to plant tomatoes about 6 weeks. We want to plant 6 to 8 weeks before we expect to plant them in the field. So that's what we're shooting for. And so if we're planting in early April and we're shooting for June 1, it seems to work out fine. After we germinate seeds and we get a couple of true leaves on there, we're going to pot up those seedlings. We start in a flat with very small cells just to germinate and to start them growing up. And then we pot them up to 72s. And I have some pictures here of what that looks like. So as we get, and then they will stay in those same cells until we transplant them. So end of May, we're hardening off the plants for at least 7 days outside of a greenhouse. And then, we're shooting for June 1 to transplant the field. Again, certainly on a smaller scale, we can transplant sooner, and because we could always cover these plants. But when you have 2,000 plants, you can't really cover 2,000 plants. It's kind of hard to do. So we always shoot for June 1. Plants will go into warmer soil and just do better in that warmer soil than trying to force them earlier in the spring. After those are fairly well established, we will fertilize with a mineral fertilizer with a low nitrogen amount. We use Midwestern BioEgg's Veggie Soul, and so if you see it's a 4-1-12 fertilizer, so it's low in nitrogen. We don't want to grow a bunch of foliage. We want to grow fruit, so a low nitrogen fertilizer is important for tomatoes in that way. But if you're going to use a fertilizer, just make sure that's what you're shooting for. And sometime there towards the middle or end of June, we will trellis those tomato plants when they're about a foot tall. And then of course we'll trellis them again later, and we'll do some hoeing, we'll do some cultivating in order to keep those plants clean. So how we grow, I would say we are semi-mechanized operation. In the world of vegetable production, you're going to get down to handwork at some point, but we're semi-mechanized in that we do use tractors in terms of the main tillage and cultivating in order to keep things moving along. We do use a Grillo walk-behind tractor, very similar to a BCS. They're manufactured in the same town in Italy, but we also use old school tractors as well on a 6-foot bed. So yeah, here's us on our main tillage tractor, an International 674. There's Mari planting potatoes. But of course, you're always going to get to some kind of handwork. On the right, you see this wheel hoe. We use a wheel hoe quite a bit, and so we kind of got to get physical. We do a lot of work in a packing shed, cleaning, washing produce. That's probably about a third of the time is we're engaged in washing, packing, grading produce. So we do a lot of that. I don't know why I put that picture in there. So in terms of greenhouse work, this is our very first greenhouse. We have a number of greenhouses besides. This one is much younger, but this gives you a sense about what these 72s look like that I'm talking about. So it's a standard 10 by 12 inch flat, and there's 72 cells in that flat. And so this is where we'll grow the seedlings out until we transplant them out in these flats. It's a germination box that with lights in the top that we use to start seedlings. And here you see the flats that are what I would call a 512. 512s have 512 cells in that same 10-inch by 20-inch flat size. So they're very, very concentrated, and we're just doing one tomato seed in each cell, and then we are covering them up, watering them in, germinating them on a seedling mat, a heating mat, and once they're germinated, we're taking them off that heating mat, and we're growing them out until we get a couple true leaves, and then we'll pot them up in those 72s. In terms of seeding and what we use for seeding for material, I like to use since in the past 2 years moved over to a Cosmo potting soil. They're from Wisconsin. It's a dairy operator who started to produce a potting soil in the compost. It performs pretty well, has good fertility. I'm really a big fan. Previously, we used to use an OMRI listed soil mix that we added some inputs to, including green sand, blood meal, bone meal, and a compost. Mississippi topsoil is something that we had used and added in on that. So again, like I said, we go from a 512 flat up to a 72 flat to grow things out. Bed preparation, how do we prepare a bed? It's fairly similar for all the crops. So ideally, we like as stale of a seed bed as we can get, and really the way to do that is try to get weed seeds to germinate and then take out the weeds. So I would say, let the weeds grow. That's what we want to do, which seems counterintuitive, but it would be better to let those weeds grow, get started, get rolling, and then we can kill them off, and then we can plant into that bed. That's what we're shooting for. One way is, especially earlier in the year when the ground is cool, and a lot of our warm season loving weed seeds haven't germinated yet, like a pigweed or all the other weeds I hate, so foxtail and all the rest. But we can cover you could cover a seed bed with a row cover. This floating row cover, it's a good way to really warm up the soil, get those weeds germinating, and then we'll often till over the top of that before we plant. You could also try torching them with one of these flame weeders. That's what I'm looking for. In terms of planting, being semi-mechanized, we do use a Holland transplanter for our tomatoes. I have a new transplanter that we're using since. This is us planting potatoes with a transplanter, but that allows us to go up and back. Since it's off-centered, we'll put 2 rows in a bed. And that's how we'll plant tomatoes. With a transplanter, 2 rows per 6-foot bed. Some people do a lot of, basically all their tomatoes on a plastic mulch. I'm not a big fan simply because I just don't like dealing with that much waste. I understand why you would use a plastic mulch for tomatoes. Tomatoes do like a warm soil, and certainly you'll keep down on the weeding with the plastic mulch. But again, I don't like throwing away that much mulch. We only use it on melons for those same reasons, simply because melons are harder for us to grow up here without a plastic mulch, just because of the heat issue. We do cultivate tomatoes and crops, whichever ones we can. Primarily with Allis-Chalmers G, if you know what that kind of tomato tractor looks like. And also we have cultivating shanks and shears on, or sweeps on a Farmall H, the H. There's a trellis. We use, the way we do a trellis is we use stakes, wooden stakes every 3rd plant, every 3rd, 4th plant. And then we do what's officially called a Georgia weave. There's some different weaving patterns. This seems to work well for me. What I'll do is I'll take a baling twine, not the stuff that breaks down, but the orange line, and I'll put it in a backpack with the whole spool in the backpack, and then I'll put it through a stick essentially. Here we're using a PVC pipe, although I think a wooden stick works a little bit better. And we'll feed that out. We'll tie it onto one end where we'll have a T-post on either end, tie it to the T-post, and then go from wooden stake to wooden stake on one side. We'll come around, go around the stake, and keep the tension that whole way, right? So we'll go down that whole line on one side, then we'll come back on the other side around the same stakes. That's the Georgia weave. So, a lot of people use cages. I don't like to use cages. This is just a good way of using not that much input in order to secure a large number of plants just with baling twine. So that's how we do it. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine or hard to explain, but look it up. You'll see some videos on it. So let me, because diseases are such an issue, I'll just finish up with this. And I've already talked about some of the cultural practices that we use to deal with diseases, but let's take a look at a few of them just so that we're familiar with them, because this really is the issue with tomatoes, I think. More so than fertility. It's not a super heavy feeder, especially compared to like a brassica of some sort. It really is about controlling these diseases. So first one is a bacterial spot. This is on a bacteria. It typically comes from debris, leftover debris from the year before. It also can get spread when working with wet leaves. So in an ideal situation, we don't work with tomatoes when the leaves are wet or dewy. It does well in a kind of warm and wet environment, like any good bacteria. And so you'll see these little spots with halos on the foliage, and bacterial spot will also transfer to the fruit, where we get a similar kind of look on the fruit. So might look this up. I'm a big fan of the horticulture department's What's Wrong with My Plant Finder. That's where I've gotten a lot of these pictures. You see this, credit to Michelle Grabowski from the U of M. This is a wonderful, wonderful key. If you go on there on the U of M department or extension site, it gives you some ideas about how you can deal with each of these diseases as well. So early blight is a fungus, like cold temps and wet. Spores get on foliage and get spread very easily. Pretty much every tomato I've ever grown has gotten early blight. This is the one that frustrates me, where people are always coming to me in the market and saying, what can I do about blight? I got to do something about this. Well, oftentimes the blight isn't hurting the fruit that much, as long as it isn't getting on too early. The plant gets blight, it dies, you take the fruit off, it's no problem. So I don't worry about early blight too much, but if we can deal with those same cultural practices of rotating, of trellising, of getting good airflow, of getting a disease-resistant plant, typically it's not as big of an issue. So I don't worry about it. One that really ruins people, this isn't necessarily a disease, it's actually a nutrient deficiency, is blossom end rot. I mean, this is 80% of the time that I'm asked about what's wrong with my tomatoes, it's blossom end rot. So if you're a master gardener, you get this question all the time too. And really it's a nutrient deficiency. It's an issue of not enough calcium in the plant getting to the fruit, and then the fruit doesn't form correctly. And so it is a calcium issue. Some people are like, I need more calcium in my soil. Maybe you do, maybe you do. Oftentimes blossom end rot will happen even in a soil that has good calcium, but it's simply because there's inconsistent watering. That is, you go long stretches without water, and then there's a lot of water, and it's kind of inconsistent, right? So if you have kind of some consistent watering, that's the first thing to try with blossom end rot, but it might be not enough calcium in the soil. So people are adding eggshells and all this stuff. But us, we use Midwestern BioAg, has a good amount of calcium that's easily brought up by the plants. And so we typically don't have this issue if fertilized well. So that's how we deal with it. Sun scald is certainly an issue. This can be a side effect of early blight because the foliage dies back, and then we have the fruit exposed and it gets sun scalded, if you will. And another one that we sometimes see is cat face. It's kind of interesting. You like dig into these things, you start finding that even amongst horticultural researchers, there's some questions like, what really causes this? It's never 100%, but a number believe that this is a cold injury to the blossoms. If the blossoms were injured early in their life, it can produce cat face. So this just might be a side effect, kind of a lingering cold spring or something like that. Another one, which is interesting, is not kind of a very clear answer here, is yellow shoulders. I've noticed it a lot when we do have a lot of heat in a year, a very hot season. there's certainly more yellow shoulders, and it seems as if something about the heat and hot growing conditions, what it does is it doesn't allow the plant to form lycopene the way it should, because it's very clearly related to, there's not enough, it's yellow because there isn't the lycopene that you would normally see that would ripen the tomato correctly. And so a number think that it is heat induced, and it kind of makes some sense to me from my observation, but there's no kind of great explanation on this. If you have a hot year, you might just have more yellow shoulders, so be it. And I think some varieties certainly have more yellow shoulders issues than others. So just a matter of really being observant about what types of, what tomatoes seem to develop yellow shoulders and which ones don't. Lastly, in terms of issues, pests. And so the only pest I really have an issue with are Colorado potato bugs. And I just hate these things. So the way we deal with them is that when the first adults emerge, say sometime in May, I pay kids to collect them in a jar and we stomp on them. But the way we do control them organically is through spinosad and this brand called Monterey Garden Spray. And spinosad is its active ingredient. So we try to get them on those larvae when they're in the larva stage as early as possible. But when there's a good enough number of them that have hatched, that we will really knock them back. So that's how we control them. Another way that you can deal with these is use a trap crop. And these bugs are their favorite plant to eat on are eggplant, without a doubt. No doubt in my mind. And so one way of dealing with this is that you could lay down a line, and we've laid down a line of eggplant near where Solanaceae were planted the year before. And when they emerge, you're all going to be attracted to that eggplant. And then you can treat the eggplant with the Monterey Garden Spray or concentrate your efforts on harvesting the adults off the eggplant. It's a way of trapping the pest where you can deal with it. And so that's one other strategy you could employ. So that's all I got on tomatoes. Hopefully this was helpful to you or interesting. I'm more than happy to converse with you more and answer any questions that you have. Or you could either email me directly at lightafarmer@gmail.com. You can always get a hold of me on my cell phone at 218-770-4398. If you want to check out Light a Farm, what we're up to, or what things I'm thinking about, you can read my blog at www.lightafarm.com. But otherwise, let's keep in touch, and thanks for your time. All right, take care.